Howdy Pima Aztecs, and welcome to Bio 201 IH. This is one of the greatest cartoon characters of all time. Some of you may recognize him as Eric Cartman. If you said that, if you said Eric Cartman, you are correct. And you will respect my authority, as he says. But everyone has their own cartoon character that's their favorite. And if he's your favorite, send me an email and tell me, or tell me who your favorite cartoon character is, or in class, in our virtual meetings, tell me who your favorite character is. I'd like to know. So, anatomy and physiology, that's what you're in. You're in Bio 201, anatomy and physiology 201. And so anatomy, let's go over some terms. Oh, and by the way, I probably will have addressed this already in our virtual class meeting or in-class meeting, but the color that I bold on the first slide, I probably should have bolded red on the last slide, but this color throughout this chapter 1, if you see anything in red, 100% chance that it will be on the exam. A test question will be dealing with whatever is in red for chapter 1. Now that doesn't mean that there's a small chance that I could ask something that I didn't put in red, but if you can answer every test question that I put in red correctly, you have to answer it correctly, you'll get at least a 90%, at least. So pay attention to the stuff in red, and the colors will change. So for the next chapter, I can't remember what color it is, but it'll be a different color. All right, anatomy and physiology. Anatomy is the study of structure, and if you guys know what AKA means, otherwise known as form. So anatomy, we're going to be looking at the form of things at many levels, from the atomic level to the whole organism level. And then physiology will be the study of function, how things function. And basically 201 is a lot of anatomy with some physiology. 202 is mostly physiology with some anatomy. So anatomy, the structure of the study of structure, is understood at a whole different number of levels. You can understand anatomy at the microscopic level, and if you're looking in the microscope, you're looking at cells, and then you're looking at tissues, which is just a collection of cells. Another subdivision of anatomy is gross anatomy. That covers the regions, like the axillary region, which is your armpit region, the surfaces, which could be your skin, and then the systems. So like looking at the lungs, the gross anatomy of the lungs or the liver, etc. And this cartoon just shows starting at the level of atoms. Atoms form molecules or compounds, and then the next level up in the study of structure would be organelles. Organelles live inside cells. Cells make up tissues. Tissues make up systems, and systems make up the whole organism. And this is a photograph of one of my favorite tennis players, Fernando Verdasco. I should put up I have a new favorite. I'm so fickle. And then also, in addition to microscopic anatomy and gross anatomy, you have another division within anatomy called embryology. And embryology is just the structural changes that occur in an individual in utero from conception until birth. So you'll study this in 202, but you know, you guys already know this. The sperm meets the egg, right? And then you have a zygote, And then the zygote, maybe didn't know that word, but then the zygote forms a blastula. The blastula forms an embryo. The embryo forms a fetus. But all these events are taking place in the uterus. From conception, that's when the sperm meets the egg, until you're born. That's the study of embryology. And this is kind of cool. This shows the stages of embryo development in a lot of different species. So fish, salamander, tortoise, chicken, pig, cow, rabbit, and us. So look at in the beginning, in the early stages of embryogenesis, or genesis is creation, so the creation of the embryo. We don't look that much different. Like, I don't know if somebody showed you a rabbit embryo and a human embryo. I don't know that at this stage, I don't know that you could pick out which was a rabbit and which was a human. And then as you progress during embryogenesis, you change still. I mean, a lot of these, you might not think the fish was at this stage, you might not think that guy was going to be a human, but then like any of these guys, you wouldn't know which one was human. Then when you get to this stage, you could probably kind of tell this guy was the human fetus at that point. Okay, the physiology then is the study of function. So here's our hierarchy again, and the cartoon, and Fernando again playing tennis. So physiology is the study of function. It's understood at many levels, again from small to large. If you've had physics, that's really helpful. I know in high school I taught physical science, and that's where we taught sort of basic physics and basic chemistry. So the principles of physics are helpful in understanding physiology. So if you understand electric currents, if you understand pressures, movement of molecules, dynamics, fluid dynamics, things like that, physics things, then that will be helpful for you to understand physiology. Principles of chemistry are also helpful in understanding physiology. So there's many basic concepts of anatomy and physiology, but here's 3 of them. The first basic concept of A&P is this concept, or you could call it a principle of complementarity of structure and function. That's where structure complements function, and we'll look at what that means. The second basic concept is the concept of structural hierarchies, and we kind of look at that cartoon. You know, you start out the basic level, the lowest level, there's atoms, and then atoms combine to form molecules, and you go up a hierarchy till you reach the epitome of the hierarchy, the whole organism. And then the third basic concept in A&P is this concept of homeostasis. So that's keeping your physiological parameters in kind of a dynamic equilibrium. So not staying at the same place. So for example, your blood pH isn't always exactly, excuse me, 7.4. It can range up and down a few decimal points. So first of all, let's look at this, the concept of complementarity. Anatomy and physiology are inseparable. You really can't study structure without function. Function always reflects structure. So how well a thing functions depends on its structure. So think about things like your muscles. I mean, I know you don't know a lot about the molecular nature of your muscles, but how well a muscle functions depends on its structure, depends on how it's hooked up to the joint, for example. Oh, and this, we can't see the whole thing. Oopsie. Should have moved that out of the way. But this is a cartoon that shows the heart. So the heart allows for blood to flow in one direction because it has valves. We can kind of see it. So here's a valve, and you'll learn all this in 202. Here's another valve. Here is another valve, and here's another valve. So there's these 4 valves in the heart, and the structure of these valves is such that they allow the heart to function as a pump, and the heart does not allow for backflow of blood. The heart allows for the pumping of blood in one direction, and that's because of the structure of the valves. Okay, still on the concept of, well, now number 2, sorry, on the concept of structural hierarchies. We talked about this. The lowest level in the hierarchy are atoms and molecules. And then the next level up, the atoms and molecules form organelles. And then the organelles are in cells. This is actually a cartoon of a smooth muscle cell. Cells combine to form tissues. So a tissue is a group of similar cells with a common function. For example, your heart tissue is composed of not only cardiac cells, but other type of cells within the heart, and they all function together to perform a common task, which is to pump blood. And then the tissue level goes to the organ level. An organ is defined as 2 or more different types of tissue. So for example, your heart is an organ, and it has cardiac muscle tissue, and it has epithelial tissue. And then the organ system is the next level up. They all work closely together. So your heart and your lungs work together. So your lungs bring oxygen to the blood, and the blood goes to the heart. The heart pumps the oxygenated blood to all the parts of your body. And then the organism, one more picture of Fernando. All organ systems together make organism. And I think this is the last picture of Fernando you're going to get. I'm sorry, but you can look him up online. And then here's the cartoon associated with everything we've been talking about. All right, homeostasis. There's 3 components of a homeostatic feedback loop. So this is really important because you'll see homeostasis in 201, you'll see homeostasis in 202, you'll see homeostasis in 205, you'll see homeostasis in 218. You'll see homeostasis throughout your career because many people today are defining disease as a lack of homeostasis. So homeostasis is a really important concept to understand. And we're going to use this cartoon with a balance. So when a variable of interest, let's take your blood pressure, for example. That's something everybody knows. Everybody knows that, you know, a healthy blood pressure is 120 over 70 or somewhere in that range. And you know that people can have high blood pressure, they can have low blood pressure, but if they have that healthy blood pressure, let's say 120 over 70, then they're in a certain range. So, and if you get out of that range, then that's unhealthy for you. So let's use blood pressure as an example with our cartoon of homeostasis. So here's the balance. So, and remember we said our variable of interest will be blood pressure, BP. So here you are in balance. Now, let's say there's some stimulus that will produce a change in your blood pressure, that variable. What could that be? Could it be that you are stressed out, or you are living in the middle of a pandemic, and that's stressful, and that increases your blood pressure? Could it be you have some disease that increases your blood pressure? It could be a lot of different things. But let's say some stimulus, some stress that produces a change in your blood pressure. Let's say your blood pressure goes up. There are receptors in your body. They're called baroreceptors. So like barometer, the barometer measures pressure, right? So baroreceptors in strategic places in your vascular system, in your blood vessels, there are baroreceptors that detect when your blood pressure goes up or down. And then those baroreceptors in your blood vessels are connected to neurons that travel in nerves along these afferent pathways. And that information about your blood pressure in in that area of your vascular system. That information about blood pressure travels along afferent neurons to the control center, which would be the for now we'll call it the blood pressure center in your medulla oblongata, so in your brain. And then the control center will take the information about your high blood pressure and it will send output information to effectors that can cause the effect of lowering your blood pressure. So, for example, the control center could send efferent information along neurons to your blood vessels, to the smooth muscle cells around your blood vessels, and communicate to those blood vessels to vasodilate or get bigger. And then that will decrease your blood pressure, hopefully back into this homeostatic range, this balanced range. So if the receptor then senses the change in the environment. In our example, that would be a baroreceptor. The control center processes the sensory information about your blood pressure, for example. The control center makes a decision and directs the response. And then the effector carries out the final corrective action to restore homeostasis. So in our example, the effector would be blood vessels. They would vasodilate, they would get bigger, and that would cause your blood pressure to go down. Back in, not to a dangerous level, but back down to the homeostatic range. And this cartoon that we just talked about is a negative. It is comprised of a negative feedback loop. Because it's a negative because in this feedback loop, the blood pressure went up, and then the feedback loop worked to cause the blood pressure to go back down. That's why it's a negative feedback. Positive feedback loops, if a variable goes up, in a positive feedback loop, the variable will just go up and up and up. And sometimes you need your variable to just keep going up, and I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. So what regulates homeostasis? Your nervous system and your endocrine systems. So we'll study the nervous system in 201 and the endocrine system in 202. So a lot of people like to use the example of a heater in your house for a homeostatic feedback loop. But we'll use an example of an air conditioner because we live in Tucson. So in a homeostatic example, you set your air conditioner to 75 degrees or whatever you like. If the temperature warms up to 76 degrees, there's a sensor that detects that it's getting warm in your house. And this turns your air conditioner on. And then your house cools down to, not to 76, but let's say it cools down to 75 degrees. The sensor detects that it's not 76 degrees, it's 75 degrees. That's cold. So it shuts the air conditioner off. And this way you keep this sort of constant internal environment with this system. So the receptor then senses the change in the environment. And in our air conditioning example, there's a sensor in your thermostat. Also the integrating center will process the information about how cool the house is. It will make a decision and direct the response. So that, in this example, the thermostat will direct the response to turn the air conditioner on. And then the effector carries out the corrective action, and the effector in this example would be the air conditioner. Here's some more examples. This is a negative feedback loop for temperature regulation. So here's our balance, like we usually have. If you get out of balance, out of homeostatic balance, let's say the stimulus is heat. The receptors will detect that heat, and you can find receptors in the temperature-sensitive cells in the skin and brain. Will send information in the nervous system along this afferent pathway. Control center will make a decision on how to cool you down, and it will send information via the nervous system to your sweat glands, and you'll start sweating, and then the sweat will evaporate off your skin and you'll cool down. But now let's say in this bottom part of the cartoon, the stimulus is cold. So you've still got an imbalance in your homeostatic temperature. So body temperature goes down. Again, there's receptors in your skin and brain that respond to temperature. Information about that cold will travel along in the nervous system, along an afferent pathway to the control center, and then the nervous system will send out information to your skeletal muscles to say, start shivering, and that should warm you up. Unless you're in the middle of Yellowstone during New Year's Eve at midnight, like I was last Christmas, and even though you're shivering, it still doesn't get you warm. It's just cold there. Negative feedback is the most common type of homeostasis. And I told you this. In negative feedback, the variable goes up, and in response, the homeostatic response causes the variable to go back down, or vice versa. Positive feedbacks. Positive feedback loops are also called cascades. So here's an example of a positive feedback loop. So remember, in a positive feedback loop, the variable goes up, and then instead of homeostatically going back down, it keeps going up. So let's check this out. Here you are giving birth. Here's the head. Here's the vaginal canal. Here's the cervix, and here's the fetal head pushing against the cervix. Now, what that does, there are neurons, or the nervous system has a component in the cervix that you can send information to the brain to tell your control center, the brain, that the cervix is being pressed upon. So then those nervous impulses go to the brain stimulates the pituitary gland to secrete oxytocin. Then oxytocin is a hormone that will travel in the blood, actually not in the nervous system, but in the blood, and it stimulates, so oxytocin will bind to smooth muscle cells in the uterus, and it will tell those uterine smooth muscle cells to contract. What happens is, when that happens, when you're contracting the uterus, it pushes the head even harder against the cervix. That sends even more nervous impulses to the brain. That causes even more release of the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin then travels to the uterus, tells even more smooth muscle cells to contract. So this is a positive feedback loop. And it doesn't stop until the fetus comes out of the vaginal canal. So positive feedback is a self-amplifying cycle. It leads to greater change in the same direction. So that greater change is more and more contractions of the uterus. If it were a negative feedback, when you got this initial contraction of the uterus, there would be a signal to say, hey, uterus, stop contracting. That would be negative feedback. But you don't want to do that in childbirth. You want to keep the uterus contracting until the fetus comes out the birth canal. Here's some more examples of positive feedback loops, otherwise known as cascades. So here's your blood vessel. This is a cross section of your blood vessel. So you have, let's say you get a break or a tear here in your blood vessel wall. You start this positive feedback cycle of forming a blood clot. And we'll talk about this actually in 202 in great detail, how this works. But basically, platelets will adhere to the site of the break, and they will send chemicals to ask more platelets to come to the break, and you'll form this platelet plug, and then you'll do a whole bunch of other things and form a clot, and that will stop the blood from leaking out of the blood vessel. So positive feedback loops, it's a normal way to produce a really rapid change. And then we talked about it occurs with childbirth and blood clotting. Okay. Overview of the organ systems. There's 11 organ systems. So there's you need to know all of these systems and a little bit about what they do. The integumentary system, that's just the external body covering. It includes your skin and then the receptors and the sweat glands and the oil glands and the hair and the nails. The skeletal system provides support, obviously, and a framework for muscle attachment. The urinary system eliminates nitrogenous waste. So proteins have nitrogen in them, and you're breaking down protein all the time, and then the nitrogen is released. You get a nitrogenous waste, and the kidney, the urinary system, actually is getting rid of that. So here's your two kidneys. Here's your two ureters. There's your bladder, and there's your urethra. So the urinary system regulates water, electrolytes, acid-base balance. Muscular system obviously allows manipulation of the environment so that you can move your arms and legs, and you know, if your environment is such that there's a ball in front of you, you can kick it. That's manipulating your environment. So it allows you to move. The next organ system is the nervous system. And I told you earlier, the nervous system and the endocrine system maintain homeostasis. So the nervous system includes your brain, the spinal cord, and all the nerves that go to and from your body parts. And then the endocrine system maintains homeostasis, and you'll start with the endocrine system in 202. And it has all these pieces to the endocrine systems. And some of the famous ones you probably have heard of: the pituitary gland, your thyroid gland, probably heard of your pancreas, and of course everyone's heard of the ovaries and testes. Cardiovascular system, again, you'll see that in 202, but that's basically your blood, your heart, and all your blood vessels. And then the lymphatic system. A lot of people don't know a lot about this, but the lymphatic system picks up fluid that has leaked out of these thin-walled blood vessels called capillaries so that you don't get edema. And the lymphatic system will take that fluid that leaked out of your blood vessels and put it into your veins, so it actually gets back to your circulatory system. And then the respiratory system, obviously your lungs. So you have your nasal cavity, your pharynx or your throat, the larynx or your voice box, trachea. Probably heard of all of those. You might not have heard of the bronchus and the bronchi and the bronchioles. They're part of the respiratory system. And then the digestive system, obviously your oral cavity, your esophagus, you know, your stomach, liver, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and anus. And then the male and female reproductive systems, again, these are all going to be in Bio 202, but you have to know that they're part of the organ systems. Organ system interrelationship. So this cartoon just shows, here's the digestive system. When you take in food, that's ingestion, take in nutrients, and then it goes through the esophagus, and here's the stomach and the intestine. And nutrients are extracted from what you eat. They go into the blood. And then here's and then things that, like nutrients that weren't extracted from the stuff that you ate, goes out in feces, leaves your body through the anal canal, and there you have feces. The cardiovascular system, here's a picture of oxygen coming in to the lungs, the trachea in the lungs, and CO2 leaving, goes into your heart, and then oxygenated or oxygen-rich CO2 blood goes to the cells of your body to deliver oxygen to the cells so that they can make ATP. And then the urinary system, we said, eliminates nitrogenous waste and ions that you don't need, excess ions. Like if you just drank, 20 Powerades with sodium chloride in it, then you could eliminate that excess sodium chloride. All cells in your body depend on the organ systems to meet their survival needs. So it's all about the cells. Organ systems work together in a cooperative fashion to form all the necessary life functions, and you have to know these. If you are a thing that is alive, then you have to have some way to maintain a boundary between internal and external environments. So even the lowliest single-celled bacteria has got this cell membrane that maintains an internal environment inside the bacteria and an external environment outside the bacteria. If you are alive, you can move. If you are alive, you can respond to stimuli. So, and the muscular system responds the fastest to stimuli. So if you think about it, if you step on a nail, think about how fast you can pull your foot off of that nail. If you are alive, you digest things, you break things down. If you are alive, you do metabolism. So you break things down, you use oxygen or some other electron acceptor, and you do metabolism. If you're alive, you excrete things. If you're alive, you can reproduce. And if you're alive, you can grow. That's why viruses aren't alive. They don't meet all of these qualifications. Survival needs for living things. If you're alive, you need nutrients. For us, we like carbohydrates, proteins, fats, minerals. For us, we like oxygen. We like water. We like a normal body temperature. What is that, 98.6? Or is it 96.8? I always forget. And you need an appropriate atmospheric pressure for wherever you live. For us, we like at sea level 700